So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are when you're able to join us for this episode, Panel Conversations. This session, I'm going to be discussing with two phenomenal professionals the concept of restrictive recruitment that has really plagued the therapeutic community for a long time. And in the backdrop of the pandemic, APRA last year requested that there was a mobilization of therapeutic professionals to try and take away this restriction and make sure that the people that needed therapeutic support were able to get it without taking away the safeguards and the protections for both the professional, but also for those in need. So I'm joined in this session by Helen Ash and Ros Young. Ladies, thank you for joining me. I hope that the conversation isn't going to be a let's beat up the sector, because I think we've got so much positivity to put into play for the audience. But let's start off by letting people know a little bit about you both. If I start with Helen on screen there, let people know who you are, where you are, what you do.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to everybody who's taken the time to watch this. So I'm Helen Ash and I have my own company. I am based in Warminster in Wiltshire. I am a qualified counsellor and a qualified life coach. My main approach is cognitive behaviour therapy, which I use in both my counselling and coaching approaches. I also am moving into the 21st century, bringing virtual reality technology into both approaches as well. Just adding tools into my toolkit. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you mentioned the virtual reality, because I think as the impacts of the pandemic really start to take hold over the coming year and beyond, I think VR is going to be something that proves very, very useful to the sector. Ros, let's hear from you, please.
I'm Ros Young. I live in Lincolnshire with a husband and a variety of creatures. I'm a qualified mental health nurse and a qualified counsellor, and I run my own private practice up here in Lincolnshire. And my main aspects of focus are military veterans issues. I'm a RAF veteran myself, and also perhaps those more complicated or so-called complex situations that people find themselves in, such as DID as a diagnosis, complex PTSD, the more almost stuck situations. I seem to find people come to me with those. So that's me.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for joining me and taking the time for this conversation. Restrictive recruitment. I think a lot of people within the sector will understand it, but for those outside of the sector that may be watching this, what's your take on restrictive recruitment? What does that mean for the therapeutic sector? Helen, how would you describe restrictive recruitment?
Yeah, thank you. So the words restrictive recruitment, what that means is that it's limiting a number of people with the right to apply and be considered for a potential vacancy somewhere, be that corporate, be that charitable sector or educational sector. So for me, it's really about setting limits and imposing limits upon individual people. And it's also means that it's moving away from individualism you know, from a very subjective level, and missing out on skill sets of people.
Would you add anything to that, Ros?
Not a great deal. I think that Helen's quite well, actually, and quite succinctly, in that it is limiting. Perhaps my thoughts would go in towards a little bit more of limiting without necessarily having a valid reason to. Maybe it being the restriction being based on a mistaken belief about. So yes, as Helen says, then they're by default missing out on a great amount of skill sets that so many people can bring.
I think the major factor is a breakdown in the understanding about the sector in itself. And I'd like to kind of kick off with kind of the maths bit, if we can, and try and put why restrictive recruitment is so damaging. UCAS, who kind of monitor and manage the world of academia and qualifications at university level, have in the last few years estimated that the qualified therapeutic profession in the UK, i.e. people that have qualified at level 4 and above, those numbers are approximately 100,000 people. It's 100,000 qualified therapeutic professionals available in the UK. The therapeutic sector is not regulated, means that there is no governing body for those 100,000 or the large part of those 100,000. What there is membership bodies that are voluntary registers of professionals. That currently stands, if we take all membership bodies, at around 55,000 professionals. Now that means that there is a huge number of professionals that are either not practicing or they are practicing without affiliation to a membership body. Bearing in mind that there is no requirement, there is no legal requirement for therapeutic professionals to be affiliated because there is no governing body. There are only 2 protected positions within the sector. There are psychiatrists and there are clinical psychologists, and they both have to be affiliated to governing bodies, one to the GMC and one to HCPC. Everyone else in the sector does not. They choose who they affiliate to. When we look at some of the restrictions placed on recruitment, we start to see that 55,000 people that are affiliated to membership bodies cut down again and again and again. So in its smallest portion, we see job adverts for therapeutic professionals that are qualified can only be interviewed for position if they are accredited by a particular membership body. Now that is mandating somebody to be part of a voluntary register. Now that in itself goes against ethical practice because voluntary is voluntary. Mandated means mandated. The two do not sit side by side. But when we look at the numbers of people that are accredited, we're talking about 20% of the total number of professionals available. Now, if we are cutting down who is available to be interviewed to 20% of the 55,000 people that are affiliated to a membership body, we're taking the smallest pool. And the talent, as both of you have said, is not being explored. And that, to me, shows the clear restrictions that are in place within this sector. But why do we think that's come to be? Why have we got to this point? What are your thoughts?
Okay, certainly for me, Dave, what it brings up for me is that therapy and therapeutic intervention through talking therapies is considered to be targeting people who have a clinical diagnosis of temporary mental disorder, such as anxiety, depression, stress, post-traumatic stress disorder. And therefore, I think because that's the approach that they want to use, that it's medicalized, then there should be a stricter belief, because it is just a belief, a stricter belief that one should be higher qualified and accredited to that body. So I think that it's more to do with the diagnosis of the people that are looking for help. And sometimes when we unpick those diagnoses and the origins of those diagnoses, some people can become anxious and some people can suffer depression because they've actually suffered like a bereavement, an actual loss of a loved one, a family member that's close to them. And if we have to think that we're going to almost have an approach that's medical for something so human and so ordinary in our life, then that's quite sad, and we're missing out on that human to human connection.
Yeah. Ros, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. That the in some respects, the taking the stance of medicalizing human experience in many respects is putting a barrier actually in between the therapist and the person, the seeker. And in having that barrier there, it's almost demanding a falsehood to be there. You know, fix, dear therapist, fix this depression. Dear therapist, fix my anxiety. And I think as Helen was saying there, that when we unpick the problem that is brought to us, it so often stems from a variety of things, many of them incredibly real, and I can't even count how many times I've sat with people and asked the question of, well, whose problem was that? How come you're carrying this problem? And it's almost, the whole thing is almost a point of connection, that when people have lost connection, or they've had to withdraw from connection because it's just harming them, it's toxic, if you will, then it's almost that disconnection that adds to the problem or is underpinning the problem. And so having a medicalized fix this problem, it creates a distance still, and so the connection of humanity is yet again lost.
I think, Helen, you picked up on something that is probably one of the biggest cogs in this misperception. Accreditation, qualification. Qualification means qualified, able to go out and work. Accreditation means something very different. And I think over time, and because of reinforced misperception and financial attachments and conflicts of interest raised over time, that those two things, in the eyes of employers, in the eyes of the public, they've got kind of blended in. You're not qualified if you're not accredited, and therefore you're not up to the job. Yet the figures speak for themselves. Accreditation, we're talking a few thousand. in relation to qualified, which is hundreds, and, or I should say 100,000. And when we've got that break in understanding about the difference between accreditation and qualified, we are doing not only the employers a disservice, but as a sector, allowing that misperception to remain. You've got to ask yourself why. Now put on the backdrop of a sector saying we want to move the goalposts about what is qualified. And how do we get past the vast majority of the sector being qualified at one level, not accredited, to telling the entire sector, not only do you have to move up a level if you want to work or be seen as qualified to work, but you also need to move into the accredited box. How does that settle with employers having an accurate understanding about how to recruit from this sector? Because I'm confused. If I was an employer, I would be totally confused as to what is qualified therapeutic professional. Do we as a sector...
I think that confusion is certainly there, you know, of hey, great.
You have a drop there. Sorry, come back to Ros in a second. Helen, what are your thoughts on the kind of confusion that employers must be under when considering recruiting from this sector?
I absolutely agree with you. I think it is confusing. I think rightfully so, the employers are seeking the best candidate for the right job, for the right client base. I get that. But as you say, it is recognising the criteria to set to find somebody who is good enough and competent to deliver a process of therapeutic change compared to status within a voluntary organisation. And yes, it is confusing. So it's raising awareness and acceptance that indeed, as you say and explain so well, Dave, there is a difference between qualification and accreditation. And certainly for me, accreditation means status and position within a body, as opposed to a competence-related position and that qualification marker.
Yeah, Ros, we lost you part sentence, so I want to come back to you and let you finish what you were saying.
It's okay. It's the wonders of technology, isn't it? I think my mind was certainly going along the line of the confusion and the lack of identifying the differences, as you've said, between what is qualified and able to practice versus what is a particular position within a particular membership group. And the two being entirely different and feels very clear to me. And yet the confusion seems to also be upheld quite actively by a great number of therapists who maybe, I don't know, for reasons of having invested so much time, so much effort, so much of their selves in the extra work asked of them by single end bodies, or it feels perhaps like that is a qualification, and the defensive stance of no, it is a qualification, it is exactly what everybody should be doing in order to be good enough, it actually can be quite quite overwhelming. There can be, you know, if a question is raised in a gentle way, there can be an avalanche of replies of how very dare you question this. We've you know, everybody should be there. So that what is qualified and capable and what is the thing within a membership body, it's being upheld by the very therapists themselves.
I think there is a huge amount of evidence in the kind of arena, and when we look at the forums within the sector and the conversations that happen, and how you know, the public don't see those conversations. They don't see that defensive kind of positioning within the sector, and almost a sense of elitism that seems to have formed, because in order to become accredited, there is additional finances involved. There is additional study, time, energy, commitment involved in, and in many cases, when we drill down through the accreditation process that has been in existence, it's a validation of what has been done in the room over a period of time. So you're not actually being measured on growth, you're being measured on what you've already grown in. And to me, I don't see many other industries where that requirement is placed on qualified professionals. There's a voluntary system. And if a voluntary organisation says this is how we want to do things within our voluntary organisation, that's for the voluntary organisation. It's not, in my humble opinion, something that is about the qualification of the professional within the sector. There is no governing body to act as one and to presume the role and to present the role as such for your personal financial gain as an organisation, to me, is abhorrent. And for employers to be under the illusion that that's the way this sector is, and for the sector not to actually go, no, that's, you've got the wrong idea here. We are doing ourselves a disservice. We are counting ourselves out of employment because we are too afraid that the voluntary body is somehow in charge. If we had a client come to us with this dynamic in another scenario, the advice would not be accept what the voluntary body is saying. I am pretty sure. So how can restrictive recruitment be communicated to the public, to employers, in a way that is positive for the professional? Because I think that's the key, when the professional is not the one standing there saying to the employer, no, you've misunderstood how this works. What are your thoughts on how we approach the employer? There we go. We got a blip again.
Hi, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yep. There you go.
Can hear me. Yeah. I mean, again, it's a huge question, isn't it? Because are we doing this sort of top down? So like it's sort of like raising acceptance and awareness of our industry so that they all tune in to get it? Or are we going to be sort of more reactive so that when the vacancies are there, and when they're with that assumption to only select accredited members of certain professional bodies, then do we approach that sort of on an individual case? So it is going to be a challenge, I think, but we can also look from a different approach, is actually explaining the situation through student learning. So people beginning in the profession for the very first time, actually being aware of the legal boundaries and the employment law and how that links into equal opportunity for everybody. So I think we can sort of do sort of a two approach, or maybe three approach, so sort of raising awareness and acceptance from a sort of like a national level here in Britain, and then responding separately, but also to begin again for all new students that are starting, say, September 20, September 21, actually allow them to see like a pathway as to how they can progress their career, and what level 4 means to them, what level 5 might mean to them, but then also teaching them and raising their awareness of their entry level into employment or into self-employment and having their own business, and letting them really understand, you know, that for them to create their own career pathway for accreditation at level 7, which costs money, that is a choice and not what the industry, clients or employers and corporates believe that they should have. So I think tackling the students, you know, on these courses as well is a good approach.
Okay, Ros, what are your thoughts?
I like that. I like that notion of getting the understanding of positioning, of the difference between academic qualification and voluntary further study, which could increase your employability, but is not necessarily going to prevent your employability if you choose not to. I think that's excellent. So it would be perhaps going into the realms of academia to get into those positions, to be able to give that message, and also to, because I think there is a potential if we do reactive one-on-one each time it turns up, that there can be a tendency to almost be seen as the lone voice out there in the you're not actually talking sense, so it's easy to ignore or to dismiss in whatever manner. And interestingly enough, I'm due to have a conversation with an employment recruitment agency on Friday about a matter, and it just so happens that I received communication from them today explaining that their clients ask for BACP. They ask for one particular membership body. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation around the understanding of, well, where does that request come from? You know, what the whole etiology of it, and where does that stand with a recruitment agency where that level of restriction is being assisted and supported. So maybe also getting into the employment area, the actual employers or the agencies that help to join vacancy and applicant together.
Yeah, it's phenomenal that you both pick up on the educational side of this, because when we look at how that process works, a provider produces a course. That course is delivered through a training provider. That training provider is invariably tied to a contract with the course provider. And that is invariably the membership body that produced the course or is accrediting the course. So you have a training provider that is contractually engaged with a membership body and then becomes the recruitment sergeant for that membership body for students that want to do that particular course. Now, I don't believe that exists anywhere else in mainstream education in the UK. where you have to be affiliated to a particular group to do a particular course, unless there is a governing body, in which case it's the medical profession, where if you want to go into nursing, you have to go through the governing body attachment, period. Governing body plays out again. That's not the case with this sector. And therefore, for training providers to impose membership onto students of their preferred membership body is, again, not only a conflict of interest, but it must be unethical, because you are taking away the right of the student to choose the ethical connection that they believe in within the bounds of professional membership bodies. And what that does psychologically sets the tone for that student that says, I did a course accredited by this membership body, I have to be a member of that membership body, I don't need to look at anywhere else. And when they actually realize that they've got choice, most people want to change. Only now their employment sector is reinforcing the same unethical mandation. So we're starting at a point where the education system itself is setting somebody up for that unethical relationship to be the starting point. Employers see that. Students don't know any different, because the education provider is trying to make sure that they get people recruited to the membership body that they're attached to. I wonder whether there is a cost involvement between the training provider and the use of that program. And if the training provider does not get members onto the membership of that membership body, then the cost of running that program to the training provider goes up. I'd be really interested to know whether they're the kind of conversations that have been going on over the last 20 years. I don't think we'll ever know, but there is a definite lack of independence of membership affiliation within the education sector, and it's reinforced by employment. So Helen, I think you're spot on. Education has to be redressed as well as the employer. At what point do you believe that the empowerment of the professional to say no needs to be put into play?
So for me, I would say upon successfully achieving a diploma level in therapeutic counselling, that would be the start of the I'm good enough and I am competent and I have a portfolio to demonstrate professional competence along with personal awareness and working safely and ethically. I think, and most of that is achieved, all of that I think is achieved, certainly level 4, definitely level 5. And at that point, it really is steering the students into self-efficacy and what they want for their own self. That is what we do with our own clients, is we allow them to feel so comfortable and so okay, and to drop the limiting beliefs that they are not yet there or not yet qualified. And I think that's definitely the junction, really, where the student or the now professionally qualified practitioner can choose to steer their own pathway free from any suggestions, recommendations, or expectations placed on them from others that instill anxiety into their own incompetence or competence. And I think as long as that practitioner that's professionally qualified has that self-awareness and is supervised, then client work will be safe.
I think the key part in that is the supervision and ensuring that the relationship of supervision and the vital importance that supervisors play is woven through the training process, because I think there has been a stark departure on the relationship that the education system has with the therapeutic outcome. I wonder whether the drive of education providers to get people through the course successfully has become the dominant driving force, rather than ensuring that the product of that education is ready to work.
Potentially a bit of both. A bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the individual practitioner and their confidence with their newly acquired competence. So possibly both.
Rose, what are your thoughts?
I find myself kind of having my thoughts go towards the requests of learning process of perhaps not only affiliating with the membership body that has an interest in that particular course, but also the almost the early start of restrictions where I've seen requirements on students to gain supervision from supervisors who are also affiliated with that membership body. So I kind of sitting with a sense of thinking that certainly for me, both professionally and personally, my supervisory experience, how my supervisor has supported, challenged, encouraged, that has been the key for me to increase my own sense of competence, which then has enabled me, because my supervisor hasn't required of me to affiliate with anybody particularly, that I've been then able to choose to look around and to see what particular group of fellow professionals are going to be available enough for me to challenge me, to support me, to be what I need in order to continue to offer the most professional service that I can. And so I'm kind of wondering whether there would be an opportunity for supervisors to be that open book in a way, to openly accept, I will accept anybody. I will accept anybody who's registered with anybody, and I will accept anybody who chooses not to be registered, because there is no legal requirement for you to do so. And I'm kind of wondering where that might practically be able to be fitted in, if the realms of academia have kind of got this input from all sorts of angles, it sounds like, with the funding, which is always going to be a contentious issue for a lot of people, the questions about that we may never get answered to, and also that whole sort of, I'm reluctant to use the word sort of seeping, but it feels like a seeping of, you only get supervision from our supervisors, you only get training from bodies and colleges, and it all feels like a great big questionable stance, because of the ethics behind it, because of the monetary links that somehow then dirty the work that happens afterwards, and maybe kind of underpins and reinforces the defensive stance when just the question is like, what does that give you? There's such a comeback on it.
Yeah, and I'm really kind of heartened that considering APA is 18 months old, we this year are opening up the endorsed learning collection, and we are allowing the professionals to look at education providers, whether they are short course suppliers, whether they are placement providers or education institutions, and look at the experience that they have with those organizations, and where they see ethical, open approaches where membership is not mandated, where information is communicated ethically. We don't have a situation where there are short course suppliers saying, here, have a diploma for £20 and become a qualified counsellor. Let's give the public the knowledge of where they can go for that ethical training approach and that ethical learning, rather than relying on the conflicts of interest and the traditional kind of silo, because silos only produce one outcome. And the therapy world is based on allowing the client to create their outcome. I really hope that empowering the professionals as we would empower a client will showcase that actually the membership body approach can work if we engage with it rather than are under the cosh of it. But is that enough, do you think, for the restrictive recruitment to be challenged sufficiently that it would empower those professionals to go, actually, do you know what, you've got this off key, let me show you a different way? Or do you think there is far too much fear holding professionals back?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, at both levels, it's challenging the people that identify themselves as a qualified counsellor because they've got the £30 diploma in CBT, because they understand the model and it's all linked and they can seek out clients. We've got to challenge people like that to be very aware of what they haven't got, and at the same time go from the top, which is this middle bit is good enough. This is competency, this is awareness, this is the relationship, and this is the ethics. So I think all of us as professionally qualified practitioners have a duty of care for members of the public by challenging and pushing out those who purport to be counselling when we know that there can be some real damage caused to client experience. But then equally at the top, challenging again, you know, that level 7 does not make you a better practitioner, because the core competencies are there and they were acquired through level 4, level 5, which is good enough. So yeah, approaching them again from both top and bottom together to sort of, you know, meet in the middle of that benchmark standard of I am now qualified because I have acquired that level 4 and completed those 400 hours minimum study and self-awareness through personal therapy, and then adopting and applying the ethics, safety and practitioner safety.
Yeah. Ros?
I think that it's certainly when I hear the word challenge, I mean, for me, I take that word as in asking the question that challenges a thinking process to inquire as to the basis of the stance that's taken. And I think that maybe others perhaps not in the profession might hear challenges in it's going to turn into a big fat argument.
Mm.
But it isn't. It's maybe just saying, no, that's so, and maybe saying it. Maybe it's incumbent upon us to be the ones that say it over and over and over again, wherever it turns up. Whether it's the supervisee that turns up, perhaps we're working with them and we're sensing a part of them that's not confident because they haven't reached accreditation with a certain place, and to perhaps support them in their understanding of their abilities, their competencies, and that they're not dependent upon membership. That it's actually according to their abilities, their capabilities, and they are qualified, if that is indeed so, if they're not student supervisees. But I think it is about wherever it pops up, perhaps it is our ethical duty to ask them, where has that come from, may I ask? And that for me is a challenge. It need not be a big fat argument. It need not be a dismissal of somebody's beliefs or somebody's felt sense of certainty that somehow they are good enough if they are affiliated. But to perhaps sow that seed of, well look, it can be that you are qualified. It can be that you are competent. You know, where is this fear coming from? And to perhaps instill that sense of, you don't have to be afraid. Maybe also for the employers. If you employ somebody who isn't affiliated, you've got a qualified and competent professional. You know, don't have any fear about that. Them through references. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I've almost got Siobhan voice ringing in my ear, and the whole point of the confidence of the professional has to be from their inner locus of evaluation, and that is what we are supporting with our clients day in and day out. But what is happening is that people seem to be becoming qualified, and then they are switching to an outer locus of evaluation in order to get employment. And they're forgetting what it is that they know themselves. And that confidence that is being, or the confidence that's being knocked by that outer locus of evaluation is being reinforced by the sector itself. And that has got to change. The sector itself is causing this, reinforcing this, and in part creating the next generation of restricted professionalism. And with the backdrop of a global pandemic, we don't need that restriction right now. The safety measures, and I looked into this when an employer says, we want somebody who is accredited by this and we won't recruit them otherwise. What happens when something goes wrong? They've employed that person based on the accreditation to that membership body. But when something goes wrong, does the employer go to the membership body and say, this has gone wrong, can you sort it out with your member? Or do they say, we have a disciplinary process, we are taking you through this disciplinary process, and we will let your membership body know at the end? If that is the outcome, if that is how things work in the workplace, then why is the restriction there in the first place? Because the safety net is not with the membership body. The safety net is with the employer and their processes and their disciplinary actions. The NHS does not take a member out of operation because the membership body says so. It takes them out of operation because the NHS says so. And then they tell the membership body that they've taken that action. And that, for me, is the clearest indicator that the bottleneck that's been placed is not relevant, because it's about the relationship with the individual and their client, them, the member of staff they're working with, etc. And when that is explained to an employer, they realize actually the safety net that they thought they had from the membership body doesn't exist anymore. Because when it goes wrong, it's not the membership body that's putting it right. The membership body cannot strike off a therapeutic professional. They cannot prevent them from working if they are qualified. No matter what they've done, there are two ways a therapeutic professional in the UK can be stopped from working. One's prison, but no therapeutic professional has been stopped from working by going to prison based on a membership body, ever. So where are the safeguards? Let's give employers the empowerment to actually use what is legally theirs and stop using restrictions that do not need to be there and don't actually exist unless they use them. Or is Dave shouting from the top of the mountain and telling the rain it's wet? I'm seeing the smiles, I'm seeing the laughter. I hope that by exposing restricted recruitment and all of the component parts that are empowering that, professionals can start to see that there is a different way. They do not have to be held back because they're being told what to do by a voluntary organisation. Voluntary means voluntary. APA is a voluntary organisation, and we do not ask anybody to be mandated to join us. We want to provide the safe environment for those professionals to excel in order to provide the best client experience. Employers can do the same. Excuse me. Here endeth the lesson. But do you think that employers are ready to hear, or do you think the system has allowed them kind of an easy get out clause, if you like?
Okay, so I think the employers are ready to hear, especially when we can steer them into listening to sort of legislative legislation around inclusive work placements and inclusive equal opportunities for employees. I just wanted to sort of just go a little further into that, if I may, please. Is there's lots of very talented, lots of creative and very successful human beings who have neurological conditions such as ADD, ADHD, and autism conditions that are on a spectrum. Now, for them, achieving beyond sort of level 4, level 5 on an academic level is absolutely overwhelming through no choice, yet they can provide such a valued service to support anybody and other people with similar neurological conditions as well from that lived experience. So I think it is time to approach the employers to say that actually what you're doing on this foot with accreditation not being qualification and mandatory voluntary memberships, to actually saying, you know, we have to be aware of individual people and their conditions that might actually limit their opportunities to get reasonable adjustments for them to even, you know, excel at that level. But actually, just because they are unable to or don't want to excel at that level does not mean they are not competent and confident and ethical to actually work with and fill that vacancy.
Helen, I think you're spot on, and I think employers, as we face probably the biggest downturn in recruitment, those employers that are still operating are now becoming increasingly aware that now is the time that the psychological and emotional well-being of the people they are working with is more important than ever in order for them to carry on surviving as businesses, as entities, as organizations. Ros, what are your thoughts about the readiness to accept, for want of a better phrase, a new psychological order?
I think there are certainly inroads that are happening already. That there are employers, including NHS trusts, who are being presented with information and are responding to that. So it almost feels as if their previous stance has been based on a misconception that perhaps the education part of it isn't only for the students in the learning environment, but also for employees and companies and organizations. So in terms of kind of getting that information out there, again, I suppose I think it's for us as professionals to provide that information that allows for employers to make a more ethical choice.
Yeah. I hope, I sincerely hope that that charge, that kind of drive for that awareness to be raised with employers is going to come from the professionals. That confidence in the professional to be able to stand and say, actually, my qualification is what counts. My interaction, my self-awareness with your staff or your service user is what counts. And if something goes wrong, it's your safeguards that protect your staff, your service users. And it's my acceptance of your safeguarding protocols that is in play. It's the partnership between employer and professional that is in play. The support network that is provided by a voluntary organization to that professional is a secondary support, not the primary, once someone is employed. But that has to come from the membership bodies empowering their members to do that. And if your membership body isn't doing that, surely you should be questioning why. Surely the ethical bottleneck that has been put on your recruitment, your way of working, has to be questioned, just as you would question it within a client. Ladies, I want to say a massive thank you for a phenomenal conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would like to share before we wrap this up? Is there anything, any last comments for either students, for professionals, or for employers? Right, I'm gone.
I'm doing the polite thing and waiting for Helen.
Well, I think for me, when as I just want to sort of refer back to my comments earlier in this wonderful conversation, but I think if the student can be empowered to create their own pathway and mind map as to where they want to be, what it means for them to achieve a certain level, and what their professional goals and their life goals and their financial goals are, then I think it would be to very much empower the creation of that pathway at a very individual level.
I think it's a phenomenal link that you picked those three things: the professional, the personal, and the financial, right? the emotional, the psychological, and the physical. And those three parts are what therapy, bringing those three parts into balance is what therapy is all about. And I thank you, Helen, for your insight and your contribution. It's been absolutely phenomenal. Thank you. Ros, any last comments and thoughts from you?
I suppose I find my mind sitting with the consideration that that the membership bodies whose ethical codes of practice I've had sight of include the requirement that their members behave in a way that does not bring anybody into disrepute in the practice and causes no harm to the public or the client. And I suppose perhaps in a challenging way, I might turn that around to the membership bodies and say, in what way are you following your own ethical codes of practice?
I think for APA's answer to that is, if we don't mirror the relationship between client and professional, then there is no point in existing. That relationship forms a triad, and we know that the human existence is a triad: emotional, psychological, and physical. Emotional, psychological, and physical within the relationship between client, professional, and membership body. It has to be the same and as close as possible. And if we, as a membership body, are prepared to hold ourselves to account, not just on a monthly basis when we have our round tables with our membership, but on a weekly basis when any member can have a confidential conversation with the executive, then surely APA's approach to that ethical engagement stands for itself, because we will be questioned. We are questioned. We openly invite that question. And if we as an organization are prepared to stand up and say, as a sector, we've gone off course, but we are doing everything we can to bring that back to where it needs to be and grow. We're not talking about changing things. We are talking about growing from what we have learned over the last 40 years. This sector is needed now more than ever before by employers and the public. And if we do not show that we can grow, we can flex, we can respond to the challenges that are in existence, then we might as well all pack up and start stacking shelves. Because what people need is what we know and what we understand. And it is why APA is the only organisation that has an oath that its members abide by. We will make a difference because we are allowing people to grow, not just the clients, but the professionals as well. Oh, I sounded a bit like an advert, but I hope what people will see from this conversation is that the APA is open to have those tough conversations. And we are here to support every professional, whichever membership body that they are affiliated to, because the whole sector needs that growth, not just those that want to join APA. And that, I think, is a stark difference to what most people will expect from a voluntary organisation, because we want to support everybody. So thank you very much for your time. Ros, I hope that kind of touches, clarifies absolutely everything about the approach and standing by our ethical core. And for everyone that's watched, if this has helped you in any way, if this has given you value to your knowledge, you can get a CPD certificate for this session. Just download the CPD quiz, and that will be in the description on this video, but also you can download it from the APA homepage. Get that into us, get the CPD once you've validated what it is that you've learned. Ladies, thank you so much, and I hope